things I think that's really important, a topic for the public and for our community to talk about is the idea of having regulations come upon us in the post-decrim world. And we will see, obviously, we already have legislatures at city council levels, like in Oklahoma recently, who wanted to start talking about repealing the criminalization of prostitution and instituting a regulation scheme. And so that is of great interest, and that's something that we need to be talking about. Our position, in my opinion, and in other people's opinions, is that we have to have decriminalization across the board, that to start to implement any regulation schemes, any licensing or permitting schemes, at this stage is just premature. It's really putting the cart before the horse. The cart really is, for our community, is organizing. That we have been in isolation from each other because of the criminalization of association, which is why we brought the right to associate in our lawsuit. And we have to really take that time to get to know each other, have opportunity to really examine what is the best course forward for our community, and not just raise our hands and say, well, whatever regulation scheme the government comes up for us is okay. It can't be okay with us. We have to be the leading voices in any regulation scheme regarding us. And in order to be the leaders, we're going to have to get some training. We're going to have to get some training in how to do that leadership and how to do that type of caucusing and educating each other on what those different regulation schemes look like and what they mean. For example, in Los Angeles, you can buy an escort license for $1,000, but that's a quite high tariff for workers to be enfranchised. You don't need to have a license or a permit in order to gain access to your rights. And that's why we need to hang out in that decriminalized state and take advantage to organize ourselves now so that we can be ready to address these imbalanced, untenable regulation schemes. We don't want to prematurely engage in subject ourselves to these types of different regulations that have been put in place over the years as a means to surveillance us, as a means to herd us into working under certain work conditions so they can keep an eye on us, or as a means just to try to control us. Controlling us should not be the primary objective. The primary objective has to be to organize workers to come together to talk about what's important to us and to get some training towards that end, because we all want our rights, but there is actual training to be activists, to become effective activists for our rights. And we really want to make sure every worker is afforded that opportunity to get some training, to get his or her voice to the table. And that's really important, to get everybody's voice to the table. In order to get people's voices to the table to talk about post-decriminalization and any regulation schemes, we are going to have some anti-discrimination legislation. We are just going to have that. People need to have the safety to come out and caucus and organize and be in association with each other without the threat of losing their children or being kicked out of their house or losing their job, if they have a legal job. And those are things that we could be working on now. And discrimination is actually in the negative stigma associated with being involved as an erotic service provider, whether you're an adult film performer or an exotic dancer, or somebody that does sensuous massage or domination, or we all are sharing from that negative stigma. So we all have to come together and try to address how these social controls, can be removed and really get us the full benefit of decriminalization and being enfranchised. So one of the ideas that we've talked about is the idea of restitution before regulation. Because our community has been criminalized, at least under 647B in the state of California, the anti-prostitution law, we really believe that we have to start demanding some restitution for our community for all the damage of having our constitutional rights to negotiate for our own labor and our own safe work conditions being so systematically impaired by criminalization of prostitution. So what that looks like is in caucusing and coming together as a group of workers is to identify, where the harms have happened as a result of criminalization. How many times did I not get to really say my rates and the services I wanted to provide? That I was denied access to a bunch of my capital, my own economic and social capital. And so I think a lot of workers have suffered under those types of conditions and deficits because of criminalization of prostitution, and that as a group, a movement, we have to start focusing on demanding restitution from those bodies who have denied us access to our constitutional rights to associate and to equal protection under the law. One of the vehicles we can look at to start to identify what the restitution we will be demanding from the government could be a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where we have some semi-public means for workers and our allies and our families and friends and community members to come together and talk about how under the criminalization regime we were taken advantage of. We were victims of crime and we're not able to report it. Maybe, some points of exploitation by the actual police happened. It's really important that our community be allowed an opportunity to have a fair vetting of all of those harms that we have sustained individually and collectively. And it's important to go through that type of public exposure process to identify the exact places where the exploitation has happened in our community. So when any regulation schemes are being discussed, they have to include restitution for those harms, and to make sure that any regulation schemes not be passed in the name of protecting us, without our voices there, without real stories and actual harms. It's important to identify those actual harms and that everybody have an opportunity to come together and speak out and say, yeah, I was ripped off by, this person. I was, assaulted on my job, and as a result, I could not, work for 3 weeks and I lost my apartment. People have to hear the real harms that happen as a result of criminalization of prostitution. And we have to hold our government accountable to make restitution to our community before they start passing any regulation schemes or asking any sort of money for taxing, for licensing, or for permitting. That's my slogan, is restitution before regulation.